A thin sliver of dawn light filtered through the cafe's frosted windows as Walter Hayes settled into his usual corner seat. The steam rising from his black coffee curled upward like a silent promise, one he hoped the morning would keep. Walter, a retired Navy sonar operator, had been coming to the Maplewood Café in Port Evergreen, Washington, at precisely 6:05 a.m. every weekday for the past decade. The small brick building on West Pine Street felt like a refuge, the worn vinyl of the booth soft against his uniform crisp posture, the low hum of the espresso machine, a familiar heartbeat. Before him on the table's corner lay the one thing he never forgot, his Navy cap faded navy wool, embroidered with the letters USS Evergreen, CVN 78. He touched the brim as if it were an old friend, more reliable than any person. Inside, the temperature hovered around 58 degrees Fahrenheit, despite the cafe's small heaters whirring quietly beneath the tables. The world beyond the plate glass windows still slumbered. Streetlights glimmered wet, and the first gulls of the day cried overhead like distant echoes of a world he'd long left behind. To anyone watching, Walter appeared composed, shoulders, squared chin, level eyes vigilant. But beneath that calm exterior lay a pulse of loneliness that pressed against his ribs every time the cap felt too heavy with memory. He stirred his coffee slowly, the spoon clinking softly against ceramic. Each rotation was a meditation on mornings past Navy ship decks at 4 a.m. Sonar pings cutting through Arctic waters, the smell of diesel and salt spray. 14 years of service in frigid seas and sweltering ports had given him two things: the habit of alertness and the ache of distance from family, from friends, from a world that moved on without him. Maplewood Café was where he paused the ache, hoping the steam might carry it away. At 6:18 a.m., the bell above the door jingled like a starting gun. Walter looked up as always, though his gaze wasn't born of fear, but habit. Navy training drilled you to watch every entrance. Three young men swaggered in laughter, ricocheting off the ceiling like ricocheted bullets. Their voices were loud, a harsh crescendo against the cafe's soft jazz piano. One carried a skateboard under his arm. The second's hoodie bore the logo of Evergreen State College. The third shuffled sideways earbuds, dangling like discarded lifelines. "Hey, check out Grandpa's hat," one said, voice thick with amusement. They plopped into the booth beside Walter, their backpacks clattering. The sudden closeness rippled through him like a sonar blast. He sipped his coffee, setting the cup down gently. "Gentlemen," he said, voice even, "I'd appreciate a little quiet. It's early." They laughed hard, brash laughter. The skateboarder leaned forward, eyes glinting. "You gonna salute our pancakes, old man?" he sneered. His words landed with the weight of entitlement. Behind the counter, Lonnie, the cafe's only barista, winced. She'd known Walter since his first morning here, recognized the toll time had taken on his once strong hands. Now those knuckles gripped the brim of his cap like they could crush it. Walter folded his newspaper with deliberate care. Its headline about the upcoming Veterans Day parade stared back at him, a reminder of a ceremony where he felt more invisible than invited. He set it aside. "Please," he repeated softly. "Some respect." A sudden cough from the doorway drew Walter's eyes up. Two uniformed officers stepped in: Officer Frank Ramirez, a broad-shouldered man with a quiet presence, and Officer Delia Monroe, whose gaze flickered between her partner and the trio at Walter's table. They paused, scanning the room. Walter remained still, back pressed to the booth. Before Walter could explain, one of the students had pulled out a phone. "We're calling this in," he announced. "He's harassing us." The officers exchanged glances. Ramirez moved forward. "Sir, we've had a complaint." His voice was polite but firm. Monroe mirrored his stance, hand hovering near her radio. Walter set down his cap and raised his hands, palms open. "I only asked for quiet," he said. Each word was measured, respectful. Yet a flicker of annoyance passed across Ramirez's face. "You threatened them?" the officer asked. The question felt absurd, like accusing rain of causing storms. Walter's eyes sharpened. "No threat. I serve my country. I'm not here to harm anyone." His words floated in the thick air between them. Ramirez reached past his partner and gently but insistently gripped Walter's arm. Metal clicked as handcuffs closed around his wrists. The weight of the cold steel bit into his skin, sharper than any shrapnel he'd ever felt. Lonnie hurried around the counter. "He didn't threaten anyone. He's just a quiet man who comes here for coffee." Her voice trembled but grew louder with conviction. Monroe raised a hand. "Ma'am, step back. We're following protocol." Outside, the morning light brightened to a harsh glare. Inside, voices fell silent. The cap slipped from the table edge, tumbling onto the floor and landing beneath a scuffed boot. Ramirez's flashlight beam danced across the fabric as he patted Walter down. No weapon, nothing but a folded newspaper and a wallet holding photos. Walter's gaze drifted downward to the cap's embroidered letters, worn thin by years of sunlight and salt spray. He closed his eyes for the first time that morning, inhaling the roast of coffee and the scent of heated vinyl. The siren's wail grew nearer, a mournful lament threading through the cafe's stillness. In that sound, Walter heard not accusation, but revelation that in a world growing louder every day, the quietest voices were in danger of being silenced entirely. As the officers guided him toward the door, Walter glanced back at Lonnie, her eyes filled with unshed tears. He offered a slight nod, a gesture of gratitude that went unnoticed by most. Outside, the siren's echo swelled across the slick pavement. The cool air rushed in, carrying the distant cry of gulls and pounding footsteps on the sidewalk. Walter stepped through the threshold, cap still on the floor. The bell chimed behind him, once a gentle invitation, now a farewell. He did not resist as the officer's grip tightened. In his mind, he replayed the routine he'd followed for decades: adjust sail, take sonar, reading maintain course. Now his bearings had shifted. A routine trip for coffee had become an unexpected voyage into the unknown. They led him down the sidewalk past parked cars and the mural of a towering Douglas fir painted on the laundromat wall. Its branches reached skyward unbowed. Walter's wrists ached, but his posture remained erect. He carried more than handcuffs in that moment. He carried every memory of service, every unspoken sacrifice, and the weight of a cap that silently bore witness to it all. Inside the patrol car, the door clanged shut. Walter settled onto the vinyl seat, the city lights flickering through the windshield like distant stars. He lifted his gaze as if scanning a horizon he no longer recognized. The engine roared to life. A sharp inhale escaped his lips, the exhale of a man bracing for a storm he hadn't expected at dawn. And as the car pulled away from the Maplewood Café, the Navy cap lay in the empty booth, its brim catching the first rays of sunlight, a solitary emblem of quiet dignity in a world too often deaf to its own heroes. Transitioning still under the weight of handcuffs, Walter felt the stir of something unfamiliar. The possibility that this morning's injustice might awaken unexpected allies and set in motion a truth powerful enough to break any silence. Walter Hayes never imagined that a simple plea for quiet at the Maplewood Café would end in handcuffs and headlines. His honored Navy cap lay abandoned in the corner booth as he was led away, leaving him to face a world that heard only fear, not a man's request for respect. Now in the small apartment he shared with faded photographs and the steady hum of a single table lamp, Walter sat alone on the edge of his recliner. His wrists burned where the handcuffs had bitten into his skin, a souvenir of a morning meant only for coffee and solitude. He wore a loose flannel shirt, now something softer than his cardigan back at the cafe, but the chill of that arrest lingered deeper than any breeze. Outside, rain pattered against the window pane in steady drips, each one echoing the crack in his spirit. The television glowed in the corner, muted but alive with images. The local news had run the story nonstop. Veterans Cafe confrontation, hero or menace Russian cap attack, scrolled across the ticker beneath grainy footage. The video clips showed a stooped figure with silvery hair and a trembling voice, officers pinning him to a booth, the cap sliding to the floor. Somewhere in the loop sequence, his plea, some respect please, was drowned by shouts and sirens. Now that same plea played in his mind with maddening clarity, but no one listened. He leaned forward to rest his elbows on his knees, fingers brushing the stainless steel dog tag he wore around his neck. It bore his name, his service number, the dates he spent patrolling the South China Sea. He traced the embossed letters until the metal felt warm and worn, as if he could draw strength from its weight. He remembered that morning at 6:12 a.m., the hush of the cafe, the steam swirling above his coffee before everything unraveled. An alert chimed on his aging laptop. Reluctantly, Walter lifted himself and pressed play. A video appeared, 3 young men recording from a shaky phone camera shouting, "He's threatening us, cops!" "Hurry," one of them laughed as he pressed send. The video had been retweeted thousands of times overnight, tagged with leaders shop vet violence, one word in Yuri, shop threat T and worse. Commenters speculated crazy old man better lock him up before he shoots. My grandpa wouldn't dare. Not one comment asked whether he truly threatened anyone. Lonnie, the cafe's waitress, had posted her own video. She spoke with a trembling voice. He never raised his voice. He just asked for quiet. The cap, he treasures it more than anything. Her hands shook as she held the camera, tears glinting in her eyes. But her plea was buried beneath thousands of mocking clips. One user replied, barista sympathy cute but irrelevant. Hashtags multiplied. Rakujan barista feels. Shakraj privileged veteran. Shakshi silent threat. Walter closed his eyes, letting the cacophony of voices fade. In the quiet darkness behind his lids, he saw the cap resting on the booth's vinyl corner. Its embroidered letters, USS Evergreen, CVN 78, fraying at the seams. He pictured Lonnie's apron speckled with coffee grounds and flour as she tried to shield him from the storm. He remembered the officer's polite but unyielding protocol, the metal coldness of the cuffs. His heart pounded, not with rage but hollow grief, the grief of a man whose service had once meant something, now reduced to a social media punchline. The next afternoon, Walter found himself at the local library's public computers. With slow, deliberate keystrokes, he searched Maplewood Café veteran arrest. An avalanche of articles appeared, some sympathetic, most sensational. One headline read, Coffee Cowboy Gone Rogue, complete with a photoshopped image of his cap tilted at a rakish angle. He scrolled until his vision blurred, then shut the laptop lid with a soft snap. Outside, the drizzle had turned into a steady rain. Walter rose and went to his small window to watch the gray world beyond. The sidewalks glistened, people hurried by, heads down, oblivious. A man in a green raincoat paused beneath a cafe awning, peering in. Inside the booth where Walter once sat stood empty, save for a single bronze plaque Lonnie had installed in the night in honor of those who speak quietly and carry truth. He had not yet seen it in person, but images of it spread online under the hashtag #Plaque of Truth. Every post included the same caption, too little too late. Back in his chair, Walter reached for a worn journal on the end table. Its leather cover creaked as he opened to a blank page. He picked up a pen, the nib biting into the paper, and wrote Maplewood Café. 6:12 a.m., wanted respect, got cuffs, the cap stays my memory, my honor. He paused then, beneath that now, facing a world deafened by noise, mocked by ignorance. He set the pen down, but the words lingered. The isolation he felt was not just in his apartment, it was in the hearts of everyone who watched a few seconds of footage and judged without context. He had served in silent sonar sweeps and midnight watches. He knew how isolation could warp the mind. He now felt that warp in his own reflection. Later, Lonnie knocked softly on his door. She carried a brown paper bag with 2 coffees, black no sugar, and a wrapped breakfast sandwich. She smelled faintly of toasted bread and late shift fatigue. Without a word, she set the bag on his table and offered a gentle nod. He lifted his gaze and for the first time since the arrest managed a small, weary smile. I'm sorry, she said, voice catching. You didn't do anything wrong. He shook his head. Thank you, Lonnie. His voice was hoarse from disuse. She sat across from him, careful not to crowd him, and handed him the sandwich. In that simple gesture, sharing a meal, Walter felt a flicker of connection against the isolation that pressed in. But even as he ate, his mind churned with questions. How do you prove respect? How do you reclaim a narrative when every click, every retweet only deepens the wound? Behind those 3 officers and 3 jeering students lay a society quick to judge and slow to understand. He had trained for conflict, but not for this. Later that evening, he closed his journal and stared at the bronze plaque's image on his phone. It glowed in the dark, the cap emblem, the words of honor. The symbol offered a spark of hope, perhaps community acknowledgement could shift the tide. Yet outside, the glow of his lamp shadows gathered, and Walter felt the full weight of isolation. Night deepened, and he lay awake listening to the rain pattering on the roof. The cap folded carefully on his dresser seemed to pulse with its own life. It was more than fabric. It was a testament to a man who had asked only for peace. Now he knew he must ask more, for truth, for justice, for a voice that could cut through the noise. As the storm outside eased into a hush, Walter realized the journey ahead would demand every ounce of patience he had cultivated at sea. He closed his eyes thinking of dawn's first light and the Maplewood Café's frosted windows. Somewhere in that light lay a chance to reclaim his story and to turn isolation into action. Transition to Chapter 3. As Dawn approached, a surprising ally prepared to step forward, armed with the very evidence that could shatter the false narrative and honor Walter's quiet bravery in a single powerful ceremony. Walter Hayes endured ridicule and an unjust arrest over a plea for silence, and his cherished Navy cap lies folded on his dresser as social media mocks him. Now a chance at true recognition draws near. At 10:00 a.m. on a brisk Thursday, October 16th, the crisp air hovered around 52 degrees outside the Port Evergreen County Courthouse. The granite steps glistened with early morning dew, and a light breeze swirled fallen maple leaves along West Pine Street. A sea of onlookers gathered banners and hand smartphones raised like lanterns. The plaque at the cafe had sparked a local movement, Yoshin Cap of Quiet Truth, and now the community demanded more than a bronze marker. They clamored for a public ceremony to set the record straight. Under the courthouse's classical colonnade, a single podium was flanked by flags, Old Glory, on the right, Evergreen State's banner on the left. Behind it stood General Patricia Pat Morales, retired Brigadier General of the U.S. Navy, and Chief Justice Maria Santos of the State Supreme Court, both dressed in formal attire. General Morales's dress blues bore rows of ribbons and a combat action ribbon. Her posture was as straight as the mast of a ship. Chief Justice Santos wore her black robe with a stately calm that silenced the crowd before she even spoke. At exactly 10:07 a.m., General Morales tapped the microphone. The static crackle gave way to her measured voice. Today we honor a man whose service and sacrifice have been forgotten by a world too loud to listen. Her gaze swept the assembled faces, veterans and uniformed families, with children clutching homemade signs reading, "Respect over noise," and reporters scribbling notes under glaring camera lights. Commander Walter Hayes served 22 years aboard the USS Evergreen CVN 78. He patrolled international waters, saved lives, and carried burdens heavier than any steel hull. She paused and someone in the back shouted, "Thank you, General." A ripple of applause rolled over the crowd, warm and genuine. It was the first of many acknowledgments that would reshape the narrative. Chief Justice Santos stepped forward next. In the course of pursuing his morning coffee, Commander Hayes asked only for peace and respect. Instead, he faced handcuffs and headlines that painted him as a threat. Today we correct the record. She lifted a folded document sealed with the state's Great Seal. By order of this court, we hereby vacate all proceedings stemming from his wrongful arrest and commit to a formal apology on record. Murmurs swept through the crowd, some jubilant, others astonished that the judiciary would intercede so directly. Just then, Assistant District Attorney Marlene Graves, once the prosecutor who had championed the charges, stepped up. The late morning sun glinted off her tailored charcoal suit. Her eyes, usually steely, now betrayed remorse. She cleared her throat. "Commander Hayes, I stand before you not as the officer who pursued this case, but as a citizen who failed to pause and listen. My actions contributed to this injustice, and for that I offer my deepest apology." Her voice wavered just enough to convey sincerity. She removed a small box from her breast pocket and held it aloft the Navy cap that had been locked away in evidence. This cap, once emblematic of honor, was treated as contraband. "It belongs to you, sir." Graves extended her hand. Walter stepped forward from the side of the podium where Lonnie and his daughter Maya had flanked him. He rose slowly, the crowd's hushed awe palpable. At 6 feet tall and now 68 years old, his frame remained erect despite the weight of recent weeks. His flannel shirt sleeves were rolled up to reveal the edges of a Pearl Harbor survivor's tattoo on his forearm, an inscription he'd inked decades ago. Gingerly, he took the cap, its wool still softened by years of contact with his head. He placed it on his own, aligning the brim precisely above his forehead. There was a collective intake of breath as remembrance returned to that worn fabric, the creases from engine room heat, the salt stains from Pacific storms, and the faded stitches that spelled USS Evergreen, CVN 78. General Morales raised her hand in salute. Hundreds of veterans in the crowd, many in dress uniforms, echoed the gesture. At that moment, the cap transcended object status. It became a symbol of quiet dignity prevailing over misunderstanding. Maya, her dark hair pulled into a neat bun, stepped forward and handed her father a folded American flag she'd kept hidden in her bag. "For you, Dad," she whispered, voice trembling. He unfurled it, 78 inches by 36 inches, crisp and new, the stars stitched in precise rows. He ran his fingers along the white stripes, each one evoking chapters of his life, from Cold War patrols to teaching local history classes for 30 years. A hush settled as Chief Justice Santos concluded the ceremony. "May this act restore not only Commander Hayes's reputation, but our collective conscience. Let us remember that listening is the first and most profound service we can render our heroes." Then with a nod, she stepped back. Overhead, a lone bagpiper decked in a Navy veteran tartan kilt began Amazing Grace. The mournful melody mingled with the crisp autumn air. Tears glistened in many eyes as the notes rose and fell, carrying the weight of lost isolation and now redemption. Reporters lowered their cameras. Even the echo of cell phone shutters softened. On social media, the shift was immediate. The hashtag or Chantavar Kappa Quiet Truth soared, eclipsing previous slurs. Users posted images of the ceremony, close-up shots of the cap, being returned the polished brass plaque on the courthouse steps that now read, "In honor of Commander Walter Hayes, serve silenced heard." The tone transformed overnight. "True patriotism, respect earned, my faith in justice restored." A student-run petition calling for Veterans Justice Act legislation gained 50,000 signatures in under 12 hours. Among the crowd, one of the original students, Connor Ellis, stood with his parents. He approached Walter hesitantly, head bowed. "Sir," he said softly, voice shaking, "I'm sorry, I never meant to hurt you." His mother clutched his arm, tears in her eyes. Walter looked at him for a long moment, then reached out and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Thank you," he said, voice gentle. "That's enough." As the bagpiper concluded, the crowd erupted into applause that rolled down the stone steps like thunder. Walter adjusted his cap, eyes glistening but calm. He lifted his hand in a small wave, not to command attention, but to share gratitude. Around him, people, strangers and friends alike, stood and offered silent respect, their faces reflecting the lesson learned that dignity often speaks in whispers, and it takes courage to truly listen. After weeks of ridicule and a wrongful arrest, Commander Walter Hayes stood beneath the courthouse colonnade as General Morales returned his worn Navy cap and Chief Justice Santos vacated his conviction. A lone bagpiper's amazing grace had carried Walter's story beyond Port Evergreen, and hashtags turned from Tushur vet violence to Cap of Quiet Truth almost overnight. Now, with honor restored and his name cleared, Walter prepared to build something lasting. That Monday morning at precisely 8:15 a.m., Maplewood Café's bell chimed, not for coffee, but for a new beginning. Walter walked through the door, wearing his dress blues, the cap perched squarely atop his silver hair. Inside, Lonnie had already arranged chairs in a semicircle around the corner booth. The bronze plaque, in honor of Commander Walter Hayes served silenced heard, gleamed beneath the overhead pendant, light its edges as smooth as a polished shell. In front of it lay a small pile of pamphlets announcing the Maplewood Veterans Oral History Project, a community initiative Walter had conceived to capture local veterans' stories before time washed them away. The cafe's usual 58-degree warmth seemed heightened by more than just the heaters beneath the tables. The rich aroma of freshly ground beans filled the air, mingling with the sweet scent of cinnamon rolls warming in the glass display. Around the booth gathered a dozen people, retired sailors, a former Marine drill instructor, a National Guard medic, and even one of the 3 college students who had mocked Walter months before. All held steaming cups of coffee, black for Walter, cream and sugar for some newcomers who still remembered Lonnie's old routine, and they listened as he cleared his throat. "In the Navy," Walter began, voice steady though soft, "we called it the sonar watch. You lean in and listen, even when the surface seems calm. That's how you detect what's hidden beneath. Too often we let the world drift by on the surface, stories unshared, voices unheard." He paused, palms resting on the worn wood of the table. "This project is about leaning in. It's about giving each veteran in Port Evergreen a chance to speak and someone else a chance to truly listen." He handed out the first pamphlet, glossy cardstock listing dates, times and locations for oral history recording sessions at the Evergreen County Library. Each session would run 2 hours accompanied by volunteers trained to ask thoughtful questions and record high-quality audio. "We'll start next Saturday at 9 a.m., Walter said. "Lunch will follow at noon here on the house." At his words, Lonnie smiled and slid a plate of ham and cheddar croissants onto the table, their steam curling in lazy spirals. A hush fell as Walter continued. "When my cap hit the floor that morning, it broke something in me, but also in all of you who watched and judged too quickly." He looked at the former student Michael Rivera, whose hoodie now bore the Veterans History Project logo. Michael shifted, then spoke. "Sir, I'm sorry for my part. I was wrong. I want to help record stories starting with yours." Walter nodded, the gratitude in his eyes so palpable it felt like sunlight warming a chilled room. Over the next 2 hours, volunteers signed up a local high school journalism teacher, a retired UPS driver who'd served in the Army Reserves, and a librarian whose father had fought in Korea. They exchanged phone numbers, and laughter began to ripple through the cafe as conversation replaced silence. Lonnie refilled coffee cups without being asked, and in the corner, the plaque's bronze surface caught the light whenever someone passed by, as if to remind them that respect was earned through small acts of kindness and attentive listening. By midday, word had spread across social media with Washington Maplewood veterans, stories and messages poured in a former Navy pilot in Kent, offering photographs of Marine Corps veteran from Olympia, volunteering to transcribe recordings, even a student group from Evergreen State College pledging audio equipment loans. Outdoor tables filled with people chatting about World War II, ration cards, Vietnam jungle patrols, and peacetime humanitarian missions. The cafe's windows steamed from the inside, blurring the boundary between the world outside, still brisk and gray, and the warmth within. That afternoon, Walter stepped outside to affix a commemorative poster to the cafe's front window. A sepia-toned photo of his cap atop a folded flag overlaid with the words, "Speak quietly, serve loudly." He pressed a small brass plaque beneath it, "Inaugural sponsors, Maplewood Café, Evergreen County Library, Port Evergreen Rotary Club." As he straightened, a steady voice called his name. It was Mayor Lillian Prescott, wearing a navy blazer and a gold lapel pin in the shape of the state bird. She extended a handshake. "Commander Hayes," she said, "thank you for leading this. The City Council will provide grants for equipment and transcription services." Walter accepted her handshake. His grip was firm, betraying no hint of the months he'd spent under suspicion. "Thank you, Mayor," he replied. "This isn't just my story, it's ours." Across the street, construction crews paused, surveying the cafe's activity. One worker, still in full safety gear, lifted his lunch break thermos and saluted an unspoken tribute recognized by a smile from Walter. The cafe's neighbor, the laundromat, had painted over the old oak mural with a new scene: veterans and civilians, seated at tables, coffee cups raised in unity under a banner that read, "Port Evergreen Remembers." As dusk settled, soft, purple light stretching across the wet pavement, the first recording session wrapped up inside the cafe. Lonnie switched off the espresso machine's steam valve, and the cafe fell silent in a good way, the gracious hush of people honored and heard. Walter closed his eyes for a moment, allowing the electricity of community to settle into his shoulders. The cap on his head felt lighter now, not burdened by misunderstanding, but lifted by every story waiting to be shared. When he finally left the cafe at 6:30 p.m., the bronze plaque caught the glow of the street lamps. He paused, fingers brushing the engraved letters, and smiled. Behind him, laughter and voices drifted out the open door, carrying with them memories not yet told. Walking home, Walter felt the cool autumn air, now 47-degree, brush against his cheeks. He inhaled, savoring the scent of wet leaves and distant cedarwood smoke. Inside his pocket lay a small recorder, empty and waiting. He glanced at the cap in his hand, then tucked it carefully beneath his arm. Somewhere ahead, more voices rose in gentle conversation. And in that moment, Walter understood that legacy was not built on grand monuments alone, but on the quiet act of listening, of leaning in like a sonar watch to hear what lies beneath the surface. Some truths, after all, are carried not in brass plaques or polished caps, but in stories that refuse to be forgotten.